For 50 years, the man my whole county calls a war hero has been telling everyone how he carried his men out of that valley under fire. Next month, they're putting his name on a wall at the State Veterans Hall of Fame for it. And I have sat in my little house up the holler all this time and let him have it. Every parade, every speech, every handshake, because some things you bury so they can't keep killing you. But there's one thing the man never stopped to consider. In 50 years of telling that story, I'm the one who carried him. I carried Carl Hagen out of that valley on my own back with a hole in my side. And I have the after-action report that says so, and I have 2 old men still living who watched me do it. And I have a set of dog tags in my pocket, belonging to a 19-year-old boy I could not carry out, that I have not set down once in 50 years. I never wanted the medal. I never wanted the parade. I just wanted to be left alone with it. But when a man takes the truth you gave him in silence and uses it, year after year, to make himself bigger and you smaller, and then reaches to lock that lie in stone forever, a quiet man has to decide whether the truth is still worth anything at all. I decided it was, so I waited, the way I learned to wait in that country, for the one right moment. And at his ceremony, with the whole county watching, I finally told them who carried who. My name is Roy Embry. I am 71 years old. I live outside Beckley, West Virginia, up a holler where my people have lived for 4 generations, in coal country, where men go into the dark young and come out old. I worked the mines, and then I fixed small engines out of a shed for 30 years, and I am, by every measure this world uses, a nobody. Which is exactly how the man in this story counted on me staying. If you're listening tonight, maybe a man who did the hard thing and let somebody else take the credit, because the credit was never the point, then I think you already understand the particular weight I'm about to set down. Stay with me to the end, and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from, because the part that matters happens at a podium in front of a whole town. And I want you there. Let me start with the tags, because I have carried them longer than I carried anything else in this life. In the winter of 1972, I was 18 years old, a coal miner's son who'd been drafted out of a holler that most of the men around me had never once left. They sent me halfway around the world, to a green country with a name I could barely say, and they put me in a squad of 9 men, and 2 of those men matter to this story. One was a boy named Mickey Doyle, 19, from Ohio, who showed me pictures of his girl every single day until I felt like I knew her. And one was Carl Hagen, a big, confident, good-looking fellow from down in the valley back home, who could talk anybody into anything, and who, I will be honest, I liked. We were brothers, the 9 of us, the way you only get to be brothers when you are all equally certain you are going to die. You don't choose those brothers. The country chooses them for you, and then it tests the choosing. I'm not going to give you the war in detail, because the men who were there don't talk about it like that. And the men who do talk about it like that mostly weren't there. I'll give you the one day. It was a valley, and we were sent up it. And it was the wrong valley. And the hills on both sides opened up on us at once. I have spent 50 years not describing the next 20 minutes, and I'm not going to start now. I'll tell you only what you need. Our lieutenant went down in the first 30 seconds. Men were hit and screaming in the open. And Carl Hagen, the big, confident fellow who could talk anybody into anything, froze. I don't say that to be cruel. Fear is not a sin. And I have never once in 50 years called Carl a coward to another living soul. Because any man can freeze. And the ones who swear they wouldn't have are the ones who've never heard that particular sound. But he froze, down behind a rock, and he could not move, and somebody had to move. So I moved. I don't remember deciding to. I went out into that open ground, and I dragged men back, one at a time. And somewhere in there, I caught a round through my side that I didn't even feel until it was over. I got to Mickey Doyle, and I picked him up. And I want you to know that Mickey was already gone, but I carried him anyway, because you do not leave a boy in that grass. And his blood is a thing I still wear. And then I went back for Carl, who was still frozen behind that rock with the rounds coming in. And I got him up, and I put that big man across my shoulders, and I carried him down out of that valley with a hole in me, because he was my brother, and that is what you do. Before they medevaced us out, I took Mickey Doyle's dog tags off him myself, because I could not carry his body home, but I was not going to let him be just a number in a bag. I have carried those tags every day for 50 years. You'll understand, before we're done, why I could never set them down. The after-action report, written by men who pieced it together from the survivors, named me. It said in plain language what I did out in that open ground, and it named the wounded I brought back, and it named, by his own rank and serial number, the last man I carried down. There was talk afterward of a decoration, a real one, for Valor, the kind that comes with a ribbon and a ceremony and a folded flag of words. But here is the thing you have to understand about an 18-year-old holler boy who came home from that country with a hole in his side and a dead 19-year-old's tags closed up in his fist. I did not want it. I did not want the medal or the ceremony or the speech or any of it. And the wanting it not was not modesty. It was something closer to a wound. Because to stand up and accept a decoration for that day, I would have had to stand up in front of clapping people and become the hero of the single worst hour of my life. I would have had to take Mickey Doyle's death and the lieutenant's and turn it into my shining moment, pin it on my chest and smile for a photograph. And I could not do it. It felt like robbing the dead to decorate the living. So I came home up the holler, and I married my June, who took one look at the silence in me and decided to spend her life standing next to it without ever once demanding I explain it, which is the bravest thing anybody has ever done for me. And I went down into the mines, into the dark and the quiet, where a man is measured by whether he does his work and not by whether he can tell a good story in the light. And I took that whole valley and I sank it to the bottom of me like a stone tied to a stone. And I believed, God help me, that it would stay down there in the dark with me until they buried us both. For a few years, it did. And then a confident man started talking. And a stone, it turns out, will not stay sunk if somebody else keeps dragging it up to polish it for a crowd. And then Carl Hagen started telling the story. His version. Carl came home to that valley a different kind of man than I came home to my holler. I came home and crawled into the dark and tried to forget. Carl came home and saw. The way Carl could always see an angle on a thing. That a war record was a foundation you could build a whole life on. It didn't happen all at once, and I think that's important. Because if it had happened all at once, even Carl couldn't have done it. It happened the way water shapes a rock, a little at a time. The first year, the story he told at the Legion Hall was more or less true, with Carl just a little more central in it than he'd actually been. The next year, a little more. By the 5th year, the wounded men in the story were being carried by Carl. By the 10th, the holler boy named Roy had shrunk down to a brave enough fellow who was there and did his part. By the 20th, in the version that ran in the county paper every Memorial Day, Carl Hagen had risen up under fire and single-handedly saved his squad. And I was not even a name anymore, just one of his men. And here is the cold, simple truth about a lie like that, told by a confident man in a town that is hungry for a hero. Nobody checks. Why on earth would they? The official record sat in a file in a government building 1,000 miles away, and the only 3 other men still alive who'd been in that valley had each, for their own reasons, gone as silent as I had. And Carl was up on the stage every year being exactly the hero the crowd wanted to clap for. His version was easier to love than mine, and that is the whole engine of it. In his version, nobody had to sit with the picture of a grown man frozen behind a rock. or a 19-year-old boy dead in the grass with his girl's photograph still in his pocket. Carl's story was clean. It let everybody feel proud and go home. My story had Mickey Doyle in it, and Mickey Doyle is not a thing a county wants to feel on a Monday holiday. I knew, of course, the first time the curdled version got back to me, second-hand, from a man at the feed store who said, "Isn't it something what Carl Hagen did over there?" I felt a cold I didn't have a name for, but I'll tell you honestly why I didn't stand up. Then, or for decades after. And you may not understand it, but it is the God's truth of it. To stand up was to accept the very thing I'd refused from the start. The parade, the medal, the becoming a hero out of the worst day of my life. It was to drag Mickey and that valley up out of the deep water where I'd sunk them and make them into a public fight. A he said in the county paper. And yes, there was a smaller, uglier piece of it too, and I'll own it. A piece that thought, let Carl have the cursed thing. The medal was poison to me anyway. Let it sit on his shelf and let him be the one to answer for it someday. So I said nothing, and every year I said nothing. My nothing became another shovel of soil that Carl's whole life grew up out of. A man's silence can be a mercy. It can also, if he isn't careful, become the foundation of another man's lie. I didn't see the difference for a very long time, because Carl built an empire on that valley. He took the hero story and he turned it into a car dealership, then 3, then a whole row of them with his big face on the billboards. Carl Hagen, the man you can trust, the war hero who'll do you right. He got the loans the rest of us couldn't because bankers love a hero. He ran for county commission on it and won. He stood up at every Memorial Day for 50 years and told that valley story while the crowd went quiet and proud. And he never once, in 50 years, looked up the holler to where the man who actually carried him was fixing lawnmowers in a shed. He didn't have to. I was no threat. I was a nobody who'd never said a word. That was the arrangement, as far as Carl was concerned, even though I'd never agreed to any arrangement. He'd simply decided my silence was permission, the way men like Carl always do. And it would have stayed buried, I think, all the way into both our graves, except for 2 things that happened close together this past year. The first was that the state announced they were inducting Carl Hagen into the Veterans Hall of Fame. A wall, a bronze plaque, his name and that valley carved into something permanent, something that would outlive both of us and become, officially, forever, the history. The lie was about to stop being a story an old man told and become a fact the state of West Virginia certified in metal. And the second thing, the one that actually moved me, was my grandson. My grandson Cody is 17. Good boy. And Cody came to me last spring, excited, because his school was doing a project on local veterans, and he'd been assigned to write about the great war hero Carl Hagen. And did I know, Grandpa, that you served in the same unit as Mr. Hagen? Isn't that something? And Cody looked at me with these shining eyes, proud to be near the edge of a great man's story. And he asked me, Grandpa, what was Mr. Hagen like over there? Was he really a hero? And I sat there, an old man with a dead boy's tags in his pocket. And I looked at my grandson's face, and I understood that I was about to do one of 2 things. I was going to lie to that boy and teach him that the truth is a thing you trade away when the lie is more comfortable and the liar is more powerful. Or I was going to finally, after 50 years, tell it. And I understood, looking at Cody, that if I let Carl Hagen's name go up on that wall and let my own grandson write the lie down for a school project, then Mickey Doyle died in that grass for nothing. And I carried these tags for nothing. And my silence had finally curdled from grief into cowardice. June, my wife, who has known the truth for 46 years and never once pushed me, looked at me across the kitchen that night and said only, Roy, it's time. isn't it?" And I said, "Yes, I believe it is." So I did the thing I do, which is the slow, careful thing. I did not call the newspaper. I did not stand up at a meeting and shout. I gathered it, quietly, the way you gather yourself before you go up a valley. I tracked down the 2 men from that squad who are still alive. Tank Wheeler, down in Bluefield, 80 years old now and on oxygen, and Eli Brandt up in Charleston. I drove to see them both. And here is a thing I did not expect, a thing that has stayed with me. They had both spent 50 years carrying the same stone I had. They had both heard Carl's story curdle and grow, and they had both said nothing, each one thinking he was the only one, each one ashamed of his own silence the way I was ashamed of mine. When I sat in Tank Wheeler's front room and said, "Tank, I'm thinking it's time somebody told it true," that old man on his oxygen started to cry, and he said, "Roy, I have prayed for 50 years that somebody else would say it first, so I wouldn't have to be the one." We were 3 old men who had each been alone with the truth for half a century. And the moment we sat in a room together, we were a squad again. I got a copy of the after-action report, the real one, the official record, which says in plain government language what happened in that valley and who did what. I had the photograph, the one somebody took of the 9 of us 3 days before, all of us alive, Mickey Doyle grinning, that I'd kept in a Bible drawer for 50 years. And I had the tags. That was my ammunition. Not lies, not anger, not a scheme, just the truth. 3 living witnesses, an official record, and a dead boy's name. I have learned that the truth, held quiet and brought out at the right moment by men who have nothing to gain, is the heaviest thing in any room. And then I did the thing I'm proudest of. The thing that I think makes this different from revenge. Before I did anything public, I drove down to the valley, to Carl Hagen's big house, and I gave him the chance to do it himself. I hadn't spoken to Carl in years. He opened the door, and his big, confident face went through about 4 things when he saw me standing there. An old holler man he'd spent 50 years not looking at. I told him I knew about the Hall of Fame, and I told him, plainly, no anger in it, that I was not going to let that wall go up with the lie carved in it. I told him I'd found Tank and Eli, that I had the report, that the truth was going to come out. And then I said the thing I'd come to say. I said, "Carl, you stand up at that ceremony, and you tell it true. You tell them you froze, which any man can do, and that another man carried you out, and you make it right while you've still got breath to do it. And I will stand beside you while you do, and I will tell them fear is not a sin. And the 2 of us will let that boy Mickey Doyle finally get said out loud. Do that, and there's grace in it for both of us. I am giving you the chance to be, for 1 minute, the man you've spent 50 years pretending to be." And Carl Hagen looked at me, and for just a second, behind the big face, I saw the kid behind the rock, the one who couldn't move, the one who'd been running from that rock for 50 years. And then the rock won, the way it had that first day. His face hardened, and he told me I was a bitter old man, that nobody would believe a lawnmower mechanic over a county commissioner, that I'd embarrass myself and my family, that I was jealous and always had been. He told me to get off his property, and as I walked back to my truck, he called after me that I had no proof, just an old man's story. He'd forgotten, I think, in 50 years of his version, that there had ever been a report. He'd told the lies so long, he'd half come to believe the truth didn't exist anymore. That was his last mistake. I won't pretend I drove home easy. I lay awake that whole night. And June lay awake beside me, not saying anything, just there. The way she's been there for 46 years. And I went through the fear the way a man does at 3 in the morning, when the thing he's about to do is bigger than he is. Because Carl was right about one piece of it. and that piece sat on my chest like a stone. He was a beloved man, a powerful one. He had 50 years of Memorial Day speeches and a face on a billboard, and a seat at every important table in the county. And I was a nobody from up the holler, who fixed lawnmowers and had never said a public word in his life. There was every real chance that a town which had loved its hero for half a century would look at the two of us, and look at the timing. Right as Carl was finally getting his wall, and decide that the quiet old mechanic was a jealous crank who'd waited 50 years to crawl out and tear a good man down out of spite. I could lose. I could tell the truth, the actual truth, with the record and the witnesses, and still walk out of that civic center as the bitter fool who slandered Carl Hagen, and spend my last years that way, and have my June spend them that way beside me. That is a real fear, and I am not going to stand here and pretend a brave man doesn't feel it. I felt every ounce of it that night. But then, somewhere in the dark, I'd move my thumb over Mickey Doyle's tags where they lay on the nightstand, the way I have 100,000 nights. And I'd think about Cody's shining face, asking me if the hero was really a hero. I'd think about Tank Wheeler on his oxygen, weeping in his front room because after 50 years, he finally wasn't going to have to be alone with it. And by the time the light came up grey over the ridge, I understood the one thing that set me free. Being believed was not the point. I had spent 50 years letting the fear of the parade keep me silent. And now, I'd nearly let the fear of not being believed do the same job. But you do not carry a thing for 50 years and then agree to set it down, only if somebody promises you applause for it. You set it down because it is true, and because the dead are owed it, and because your grandson is watching to learn whether the truth is a thing a man stands on or a thing a man trades away when it gets expensive. Whatever that room decided about me, I was going to walk into it and tell it true. The rest was not mine to control. And at 71, I had finally made my peace with how much of this life is not ours to control. The Hall of Fame ceremony was at the Civic Center. A few hundred people, the flags, the mayor, the whole county turned out to honor Carl Hagen. They'd invited the surviving members of his unit as a courtesy, which meant they'd invited me, never dreaming what they were doing, seating the truth right there in the third row. Carl saw me come in with Tank in his wheelchair and his oxygen, and Eli beside us, and I watched the color go out of his face, because he understood, finally, that I'd meant it. They did the speeches. They read Carl's citation, the version he'd written across 50 years. The valley, the men carried to safety, the hero of that day. And then the master of ceremonies, doing a kindness he didn't understand, said it would be fitting to hear from the men who served alongside our honoree. And did any of his old squad wish to say a word? And I stood up. I'll tell you, my legs were not steady, and the room tilted a little the way that valley tilted 50 years ago. But I stood, and Tank Wheeler reached up from his wheelchair and took my hand and held it. His on top of mine, the oxygen line running across both, and Eli Brandt got to his feet on my other side, slow, an old man's effort, and the three of us stood there in that quiet, bright room full of flags. And I did not shout, and I did not point, and I did not say the word liar, because I had decided on the drive over that I would let the truth carry its own weight, and I would keep my own hands clean of him. I just told them what happened in that valley. I told it the plain way, the way you'd tell it to a doctor. I told them about the wrong valley, and the hills opening up on both sides at once, and the lieutenant going down in the first 30 seconds. I told them a man froze that day, and I did not say his name. And I said again, looking right at the crowd, that any man can freeze, that fear in that place was not a sin, that I would not stand here and call a frightened man a coward. And then I told them somebody had to go out into that open ground anyway, and that the somebody was me. I told them about dragging the wounded back one at a time, and the round that went through my side that I never felt until it was over. I told them about a 19-year-old named Mickey Doyle, And I said his name slow and clear so it would land in that room and stay. A boy I could not save and would not leave. And I told them that the very last man I carried down out of that valley, across my own shoulders, with that hole in my side, was the man whose name they had come here tonight to carve into a wall. Then I did the only hard thing I did the whole night. I turned to the chairman of the State Veterans Board, who was sitting right there at the head table in his good suit, and I asked him, respectfully, to do one simple thing: to request the official after-action report from that engagement, which any member of that board had every right to pull, and to read aloud to this room the name it records as having carried the wounded out. I told him I'd wait. I told him we'd all wait, because the truth of that valley was not my word against Carl Hagen's. It had been written down in plain government ink, the same week it happened, by men with no reason to lie. And it had been sitting in a drawer for 50 years, simply because no one in this county had ever once had a reason to go and look. The room was so quiet you could hear Tank's oxygen hiss. And then Eli Brandt, who had not spoken in public in his life, said, in a voice like gravel, "Every word that man just told you is true. I was 10 feet from him, and I have been ashamed for 50 years that I let another man take it." And Tank Wheeler said, from his chair, the same. 3 old men, 1 report. 1 dead boy's name, finally said out loud in a room full of people. I did not have to destroy Carl Hagen. I only had to stand up and tell the truth in front of witnesses. And let everyone in that room do the arithmetic that 50 years of comfortable silence had kept them from ever having to do. I have thought a lot about Carl's face during that. It did not go to anger. Not at the end. It went to something worse and more honest. It went slack and old and afraid. The exact face of the kid behind the rock. And I understood that Carl Hagen had been that frightened kid every single day for 50 years. That the lie had never once made him feel like the hero. It had only made him more afraid every year of the day it would come apart. And now the day was here, and underneath all of it he looked, God help me, almost relieved. He did not deny it. That's the one thing I'll give him. When the truth finally filled that room, Carl Hagen sat down in his chair of honor and put his face in his hands and did not say a single word. And his silence, at last, told the truth his mouth never had. Here is the last move, the one underneath all of it. When it was done, I had Carl Hagen finished, more completely than any lawsuit could have finished him. The Hall of Fame quietly withdrew the induction. The county paper that had printed his hero story every Memorial Day for 50 years came up the holler to my door, notebooks out, and I understood, standing on my own porch, that I was holding the whole of Carl Hagen's life in my hand. I could have given them everything. The fraud of it. The dealership loans a young man got because bankers love a decorated hero. The commission seat he'd won on a stolen valley. A vindictive man. A man with 50 years of justified anger. Could have spent Carl's last years on this earth watching every brick he'd ever laid come down in public. Slow, in front of his neighbors and his church and his grandchildren. And I want to be honest, because the rule of telling a thing true cuts both ways. I thought about it. For one long night, I thought about exactly how much that man had cost me and how good it would feel to collect it all at once. And then I didn't. Carl's grandchildren go to school with mine, and they did nothing. And a boy should not have to grow up as the grandson of the man Roy Embry destroyed. But it was more than that, and I'll tell you the real reason, because it's the only part of this whole story I'd ask you to carry home. I had spent 50 years learning, the hardest possible way, the difference between justice and the simple animal wish to make somebody suffer. Justice was Mickey Doyle's name said out loud in a room that needed to hear it. Justice was the record set straight and the wall left clean. Wanting Carl to suffer past that point was just one more weight, and I was 71 years old, and finally setting weights down, not picking new ones up. So I told the newspaper the truth of that valley, all of it, because the truth was owed to Mickey and to Tank and to Eli and to the 18-year-old I used to be. And then I stopped, dead, right at the edge of the truth. And I did not take one step past it into vengeance. I never called Carl a coward, not to the board, not to the paper, not to you. I'd carried that man down out of one valley with a hole in my side. I was not going to follow him down into another one and lose myself at the bottom of it, just for the pleasure of watching him fall. They did, in the end, give me the decoration. 50 years late, at a small, quiet ceremony in a side room, which is the only kind I would ever have allowed. June on one side of me and Cody on the other. I almost didn't take it. For the very same reason I never wanted it the first time, but I took it. And I took it for the boy beside me. So that Cody would have it in his hand someday. So that the thing finally set down in the record of this county would be the true thing and not the comfortable lie. So that when I'm gone, there would be proof that a quiet man told the truth once and that it mattered. And then I did the last thing, the thing that let me finally set down the weight I had carried in my pocket since I was 18 years old. I drove up to Ohio, and I found Mickey Doyle's family, his baby sister, an old woman herself now with grandchildren of her own, and I sat in her kitchen, and I put her brother's dog tags into her hands. 50 years, and a war, and a whole life after I'd taken them off him in that grass. I told her who Mickey was over there. He carried her picture and the picture of his girl, that he was good and that he was brave, and that he was funny right up to the end. I told her that her brother did not die alone and was not left behind, that a man carried him out and kept his name in his pocket and said it every single day for 50 years. She held those tags against her chest, and we both cried in that kitchen. Two old strangers bound together by a 19-year-old boy. That was the only ceremony I ever actually wanted. That was the one that finally let me put it down. So here is what I'll leave you with tonight. Wherever you're listening from, there are men who do the hard thing in the dark. And there are men who tell the story in the light. And the world will almost always believe the man in the light, because his version is cleaner and louder and easier to love. If you are one of the quiet ones, one of the men who did the thing and let somebody else take the credit because the credit was never why you did it, then hear me. Your silence is a gift, and it is yours to give, but it is not theirs to take. And there is a difference. The day they stop being grateful for your silence and start using it to make themselves bigger and you smaller, the day they reach to carve the lie in stone, that is the day the gift is over. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be cruel. You just have to stand up, with whatever witnesses you've still got and whatever record still exists, and tell it true, once, before it's too late. The truth waits a long time, but it does not wait forever, and it should not have to. If you were ever the one who did the hard thing and watched somebody else take the credit, tell me about it down in the comments. And tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read every one. If this was worth your time, subscribe and tell your truth while you've still got breath to tell it. And remember that the man who carried the weight is always the one who knows what it weighed.